Now, welcome to the Scrubbers panel of the 2021 GREEN4SEA Virtual Forum. In this panel, we will be discussing about practical issues with respect to implementation of the greenhouse gas emission regulations and the SOx and the CO2 and everything, but with respect to specifically scrubbers. So it's not going to be a very wide-range discussion. We have approximately 4,000 ships that are currently fitted with scrubbers on the occasion of the year of the IMO sulfur cap implementation. The Clean Shipping Alliance highlighted the important role that scrubbers play in supporting industry's effort for a carbon neutral future, let's say, as we move forward. Absolutely, scrubbers cannot be part of the end game. Why? Because you need fuel, and what they do actually, they're taking out the sulfur. And in that sense, we're not talking about a different fuel. We're talking about a piece of equipment, a machinery that it's added onto the ships. Now, where do we stand with respect to exhaust gas cleaning systems, as we call them scientifically, or scrubber in practical terms? What are the lessons learned so far? What are the incentives of installing or not installing, let's say, scrubber? What we expect to see in the near future? How we approach the issue of local restrictions with the open loop scrubbers, and what's the key feedback and maybe best practices to be learned from what we have gained from the experience building so far. Now, in order to have this discussion, we have assembled a panel of experts. Let me briefly introduce to you. We have Nick Confuorto, who is the President and Chief Operations Officer of CR Ocean Engineering, a maker of scrubbers. We have Donald Gregory, the Director representing the Exhaust Gas Cleaning Systems Association. This is the Association of the Makers. And we have Chris McMenemy, who is the CEO of Progresso Group, and Noel Somercalio, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Foresight. Both of them are involved in the retrofitting business. And last but not least, we have Jenny Grasso, who is partnered with Blank Rome, actually a lawyer, to present some sort of, let's say, legal background of where we stand with respect to the implementation of these systems. Now, I would like to welcome you all to the panel. And as we have the first order of business, the introduction, let's say, out of the agenda, I would like to proceed with the second order of business. Let's have your presentations. I would like to ask Don to share his screen and let us have his presentation.
Thank you again. So I'd like to start saying, with the exception of nuclear power, it's currently apparent that the prime mover for ship propulsion and power generation for at least the next 20 years will be the marine diesel engine. Due in part to the type of combustion and in part to the type of fuels used, diesel engine exhausts have been classified by the World Health Organization in 2012 as a toxic pollutant. To date, IMO has failed to regulate some of the compounds in the exhaust which are considered toxic or carcinogenic. IMO has regulated SOx emissions by specifying fuel sulfur content. This has had the unfortunate effect of increasing global emissions of CO2 caused by shipping. IMO is, however, committed to reducing CO2 emissions, but it is likely to be overtaken by the EU, who will require shipping to join some sort of carbon scheme by 2024. Accepting diesel engines will use a fuel source to provide mechanical and electrical energy. The options for CO2 reduction revolve around using less fuel or using fuel with a lower carbon footprint. The SINTEF study illustrates in the slide that the energy required to produce some of the e-fuels, these are fuels made using renewable electricity, require enormous amounts of energy, certainly more than will be available from all the wind turbines likely to be built and installed in the next 10 years. The inconvenient truth to those who have consistently sought to undermine high sulfur fuel oil as a marine fuel is that, as a starting point, it has a lower CO2 footprint than any of the currently viable options. Remember, reducing CO2 today will cost shipping less than reducing CO2 in the future. So, scrubbers plus high sulfur fuel equals 10 to 20% CO2 mitigation today. Some ports and harbors incentivize ships to do good things. Reducing SOx below IMO limits can mean thousands of dollars in port due savings. These savings are being made by using scrubbers. On the other hand, there are no published studies that open loop scrubbers have caused harm at sea or in port. This applies to ships, and Rotterdam has had scrubbers in operation for well over 60 years, and land plant where the point source has been discharged for tens of years without impact. Again, no published studies to identify any sort of significant marine harm. The EGCS website, however, has a map which pinpoints some ports where an arbitrary decision has been taken to ban open loop operation. Ports which are a source of local air pollution from ships, dock equipment and land transport appear to have ignored the benefits of scrubbers when making open loop bans. However, the science is not supporting their case, and it is hoped that some will reverse the decision. IMO is considering harmonization of assessment of risk in addition to limits in the exhaust gas cleaning system guidelines. In other words, there are already limits on discharge of the wash water, and IMO is also looking at harmonizing assessment of risk in certain sea areas. Nevertheless, this will be a pointless activity if ports continue to take unilateral action. So in summary, diesel engines will be predominant. Air pollution will be more regulated than it is today. Fuels of any type will contribute to air pollution, even LNG, for example. The sooner the CO2 is reduced, the better. And that really leads to the conclusion that exhaust gas cleaning, normally wet systems, is the obvious and most cost-effective gas cleaning system available. Continuous studies have failed to identify harm to water bodies from open loop discharge. So in conclusion, let us forget the hype and use the facts to drive decisions on future investment in a cleaner world. Thank you. Back to you, Apo.
Thank you very much, Don. Let's hear from Nicolas Confuorto.
Yeah, I'm Nick Confuorto. I'm the president of Sierra Ocean Engineering. We're a global supplier of scrubbing systems. We are based in the United States. And I'll be presenting now about some of the benefits of scrubbers, which ties very well in with what Don just presented. Let me see if I can get to the next slide. In addition to sulfur emissions, scrubbers also remove particulates, black carbon. They have a lower CO2 footprint than sulfur fuels, than low sulfur fuels. And it has been shown to be the lower cost alternative. Regarding the CO2, we all know that the 2015 ECA, the 0.1 or the 0.5 are measured based on a ratio, the lowest ratio being for the 0.1, which is 4.3. Scrubber systems can do much more than that if required or if the client wishes to do. Some of our clients wanted to achieve near zero, and you see there from one of our systems that near zero can be achieved if a client really wanted to do that. On the particulate side, the problem with even MGO is that there are fine particulates. And even though the MGO has lower amount of large particulates than HFO, it does still have quite a lot of fine particulates and black carbon. You see above here the three samples taken on the top. Those are from an engine burning MGO. These are stack samples. While at the bottom, you see three samples taken from a ship burning HFO, however, having a scrubber system. It's very visual, and you can see there that the stack using scrubber is a cleaner stack than even MGO. The problem with particulates is that it causes many different problems to the human health. And you see a list there of respiratory diseases, lung diseases, many different kinds of cancer. And of the particulates, the most dangerous one are the ones that are below 2.5 micron in size, because they enter the bloodstream through the lungs and cause all these health problems. Scrubbers remove about 80 to 90% of the particulates larger than 2.5 micron, but they also remove about half of the particulates smaller than 2.5 micron. So it depends on the design of the scrubber. It could be anywhere from 30% to 50%. That's a major benefit when you consider the health of humans, either on the ship itself or on the coastline where the particulates normally end up landing. Part of the fine particulates is also black carbon. The black carbon, in addition to the health issues, also has a climate change impact, because black carbon deposits on the ice and the snow, and it causes the melting, which then contributes to the rising sea levels. That also is a problem. Well, in our company, we are developing, and we're in a stage now of demonstrating it on ships, a system that will reduce not only the large particulates, but also the fine particulates. And so that's going to be a big advantage when people look at where is the scrubber system going in the future. It's going to have to address this PM 2.5 and below. Regarding CO2, I've seen this slide, and this is the clearest slide on CO2 impact that I've ever seen. I don't remember which publication this was in, but when you look at a baseline, which is a ship burning HFO with a scrubber, they use about 3.2 tons and that's per day of CO2. However, CO2 for VLSFO is 3.9. CO2 from MGO is 4.2. The difference is about 28 tons a day when using a 40 ton of fuel per day. And over a year is 8,400 tons of CO2 that you can reduce by using scrubbers instead of MGO. So there is a major benefit to the CO2 footprint of a ship. The issue with all that, however, is the installation. Installing scrubber is not easy. So a good engineering company is required. And I'm glad to see that Ali is on. He's done this type of work many times before. This is just an example of a ship that we worked on with one of the engineering companies. This is for Stena Scandinavica. Installing all that equipment in a tight space is not so easy. And good engineering company can make this happen much quicker and at less cost. This is again Scandinavica. You can see the fit of scrubbers in funnels sometimes it is a challenge. And here we had to put in 4 scrubbers, 2 on each side, but they fit. Running the piping and all that equipment, it's something that a good engineering company can do. Again, this is another Scandinavica ship that we completed. This one was done differently. This came from the top. Installing it in place of a silencer from the top can be done as long as you plan it properly. Or it has to be cut in pieces and coming from the side. We've done some of these as well. Or in the back of the funnel. You see here a scrubber installed behind the funnel, and then the funnel is enlarged to incorporate it. That's what we're calling a backpack installation. And that's all I had prepared for the short presentation today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for the very resourceful name you put over there with the backpack installation.
Yes.
Now, let's hear from Chris.
Okay, so yes, my name is Chris McMenemy. I am CEO of CleanShip. We are one of a number of engineering companies in the world that has been very busy over the last 2 or 3 years with scrubber retrofits. And today I would like to share something maybe a little bit different, and that is discussing the topic of shipyard variations in the scrubber industry. So just to give you some context of CleanShip, we, between 2018 and 2020, were involved in over 130 scrubber projects around the world. We personally supervised just over half of them in the shipyards around the world, predominantly China, but also Northern Europe and some in the UAE. So we probably were responsible for around 3 to 5% of the 4,000 scrubbers that have been installed. And you can see from the screen, we worked with a number of large companies in doing so. Our team is very diverse. It's important to stress, given the topic of my presentation, that our team is very diverse. So we're not just engineering experts, we also have a team full of commissioning engineers who've actually commissioned the scrubbers, fabrication specialists who've been involved in actually fabricating the scrubbers. So we have a very diverse and comprehensive understanding of scrubbers from start to finish and what's involved. And like I said, we've done projects around the world, but predominantly China. So shipyard variations for a number of people in the audience are probably nothing new, right? Anyone who has taken a ship to dry dock, particularly in the Far East, will be expecting to spend 10 to 20% beyond what they had hoped, what they had planned to spend. But we, and I'm sure a number of people on this panel, have seen themselves over the last few years what I could describe really as a feeding frenzy of shipyard variations tying to scrubber projects. And what we found quite interesting and entertaining a lot of the time is the lack of substantiation, the vague and often fictitious nature of a number of these variations. Now, we can look back in hindsight and often laugh at the descriptions of some of these variations, but it's a very important lesson to learn going forward. Should scrubber uptake start to increase again and shipyards start to become very busy with scrubber retrofits, there's a number of very important lessons we can learn with how to avoid what in some cases we witnessed were exceptionally large shipyard variations. So putting some actual numbers behind this, which we think is quite interesting, we looked back over the 130 projects we conducted between 2018 and 2020. We tried to understand, is there a pattern on these projects where variations were significant and not? And what we found is that when we were not involved in the supervision of a project, the number of variations was in excess of $50,000, was around 86% or even higher. Now we're terming this significant variation as being $50,000 in total, in addition on the final shipyard bill. But when we were actually contracted to provide the supervision, so we were present throughout the installation, that number was less than 10%. And it's no surprise that if you're present on site, you can mitigate some of these problems, but the difference in percentage here is startling. So what we really discovered here is that shipyards were fully taking advantage of the lack of engineering supervision. Now, we thought maybe there's more pattern to this, so we dived in a little deeper, and we discovered that 70% of the projects that were seeing large variations did actually have a superintendent on site. So this wasn't simply a case of there being nobody on site to oversee the shipyard. The superintendent, as part of the dry dock, was indeed there. But what's fairly obvious to us all now, looking at the data, is that it's a very big ask to ask a superintendent during a dry dock who has so many other things to take care of to oversee a scrubber project, which is a very large and complicated project, right? Now, going even deeper than this, we started to pull together some of the explanations from these yards for this 86% of why they had to raise variations. The biggest was, of course, drawing errors, right? In inverted commas here, because more often than not, there was no further detail. They simply claimed that there were drawing errors and that this cost a significant amount of money to fix. We couldn't dive into any more detail with this because there simply wasn't any. In many cases, we found that spools didn't fit, was the claim of the shipyard, but again, no evidence of having tried to fit them. The superintendent couldn't recollect them trying to fit them because he was so busy elsewhere, nor was there any evidence of any QA checks having been done on any of the pipe spools prior to them being fitted. So nobody actually knew if they were fabricated correctly in the first place. Clashes was another common excuse where they had presumably tried to fit things and claimed that there were major clashes with existing structure. Not a big secret that in a retrofit project there are going to be clashes. We, like most other engineering companies, provide a list of these clashes before the project starts and some guidance on how to mitigate them. But more often than not, the shipyard ignores this guidance and tries to fit something, and then claims for the work that has to be done to rectify the clash. And then last but not least is a personal favourite, where the shipyard prefabricates closing spools and then claims the owner for having to refabricate them, when, for those that are not aware, closing spools are actually meant to be the last ones that are fitted and are adjusted on site to suit any differences between the drawings and the actual installation. Now, these are just some of the actual written down excuses that we've seen, but some of the anecdotes that we have from these projects are startling. We had one project where the shipyard, having already done the lead vessel, on a sister vessel, they claimed that the drawings were not good enough for them to use, and asked the owner to pay $50,000 to redraw the drawings using their engineering company. And we discovered, this was 3 days before the ship was arriving, incidentally. We discovered during the project that they were actually still using our drawings anyway. So there was lots and lots of unscrupulous behaviour going on with these shipyards, and they were fully taking advantage of the lack of supervision by the engineering company to blame the engineering for a variety of different things and claim the owner for what in some cases were significant six-figure sums. And some of the examples that our supervisors did catch because they were present are here. So the first one on the left here is an example of the shipyard prefabricating and installing the closing spools already, and by the time they get to this junction here, the pipes don't align, so the shipyard has to fabricate some crazy looking spool to fix the gap, and then of course charge the owner for the luxury of having to fabricate this spool. The one in the middle is a sea chest during fabrication. Our supervisors arrived on site and discovered that this was being installed between the wrong frames on the vessel. They had counted the frames wrong. So thankfully we caught it only halfway through installation, but had this not been caught early, for sure the shipyard would have charged the owner to move this and to fix the problem. And then the third one here on the right is a spool that was meant to be installed in 316 stainless, and actually, as you can see, had been installed in carbon steel and simply hand painted with something shiny. So closing remark is, based on the data we have from the first batch of scrubber projects between 2018 and 2020, always employ a retrofit supervisor, preferably the engineering company that you use to do the engineering, because if we catch these problems during the installation, we can mitigate them in real time and before they appear in the final bill. Once they're on the final bill, it's simply a negotiation exercise. You can't argue with what happened. And our data shows that by not having a supervisor, it's about 75% more likely that you'll have significant variations versus having a supervisor on the site. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Let's hear from
Yes, thanks, Apostolos. Today I'm going to talk to you briefly about some lessons learned from our scrubber retrofit projects. Olli Somerkallio, I'm the CEO of 4Ship. I'm a naval architect by education and been with 4Ship since 2014. 4Ship is a naval architectural consultancy that was founded in 2002, and we cover all the disciplines of ship design. We are specialized in passenger vessels, but have a lot of experience in cargo ships and special vessels as well. We are located in Finland, Estonia, Germany, and USA. Briefly about our scrubber experience, we've completed over 60 projects since 2011 and basically cover the whole lifespan of a scrubber retrofit installation, except for the actual installation work. And I do agree with Chris about the importance of the actual supervision of the installation work as well. So that's a good point. We've worked on all major ship types and also done cooperation with all major class societies and scrubber suppliers and done work for more than 10 owners. Things to consider in the design. Space availability is quite an important thing, as Nick also mentioned. On the right hand side you can see a 3D model of a hybrid scrubber system with all the components, piping and tankage. As you can imagine, it's quite challenging to fit this kind of a system inside existing machinery spaces, especially when those spaces are quite commonly quite crowded already. Another interesting niche thing is that quite many ships need to operate in delicate areas like Alaska, for instance. And in those areas, you cannot actually discharge anything. So you have to collect all your effluents from the system and have tankage to store it. And that amount of tankage could be quite substantial. Electrical power supply is actually quite limited, especially on cargo ships, and the scrubber system pumps, they take quite a lot of power, so that's another thing to consider. Especially old ships, it could be quite difficult to find drawings of the vessels. They could be outdated, and their accuracy could be quite poor. And another thing, especially in passenger ships, is the damage stability. So if new tanks are required or pipes need to pass through watertight bulkheads, the damage stability is affected, and that basically means recalculation of the vessel stability, which could be quite complex. The different class societies and flag authorities also have quite varying requirements for the installation. So there is no one single solution that could fit all the projects. Then going to the installation phase, the picture here you can see a typical installation site on a vessel is quite congested with a lot of different items. There's scaffolding, new material like pipes coming in, also the system that is being worked on, and quite many risks are related to working in these kind of environments. One important item to understand is that typically the new piping for the system is actually done out of GRP or PE, which are basically plastic materials and combustible, and when you are doing fireworks, there's a risk that you would basically cause a fire, and there's a lot of combustible material which will of course make the fire even worse. So definitely a risk management issue. Then if the installation is done during operation, there's also things to consider. For instance, if you need to work on the vessel's watertight integrity, you can only do that work during the port stay, because all the watertight bulkheads need to be intact when the vessel is at sea. Another thing, especially in passenger ships, is that of course the works will cause a lot of noise and smells, and you might need to close some space and so on, and that will have an effect on the passenger comfort. In some projects, quite substantial modifications on the vessel structures are required. In that case, you need to carefully consider how that will be done, because if you just simply remove everything first and then start replacing them, you could compromise the structural integrity of the vessel. So instead, you actually need to work step by step and always consider how you compensate for the lost structures. Another key thing is the cooperation between the installation teams and the ship crew. To successfully execute the project in the planned schedule, you'll need a lot of assistance from the ship crew, so it's important to keep them happy. After the installation, the operation starts, and of course there's some challenges with that as well. On the right side, you can see an image of it's by DNV, and it's basically a corroded scrubbing water discharge hull penetration. There's actually quite many of these cases, and basically these are normally due to poor coating or wrong selection of materials. So definitely a thing to consider unless you want to have water inside the ship. Also, we are adding a lot of new equipment in the existing spaces, and the ventilation and cooling of those spaces hasn't been designed considering new installations. So the heat load coming from the new equipment needs to be considered, and possibly the ventilation and cooling needs to be redesigned. Vessels operating in the ice could have problems with the seawater intakes getting clogged with ice. Typically, on a normal vessel cooling system, you can always recirculate the warm water back into the intake to keep it free from ice, but on a scrubber sea chest, that's not possible because of the acidic and basically dirt in the discharge water, so you don't want that in the intake. Some scrubbers are installed in bypass of the actual exhaust gas line, and in that case you need bypass dampers, and those bypass dampers could malfunction as well. So in that case you could even end up blocking the whole exhaust gas line, and in that case the exhaust will end up somewhere in the engine casing, for instance, and that the hot exhaust gas is of course a considerable risk for the crew and the equipment. The last thing to mention is of course the maintenance, especially the complex hybrid systems. There's a lot of new equipment, a lot of new automation included, and some cruise lines have actually reported that they need a new crew member to look after the system. So surely a thing to consider as well. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olli. And let's hear from Jenny.
Good day, all. I'm Jeannie Grasso, a maritime lawyer with Blank Rome in Washington, D.C. I spend 100% of my time on maritime regulatory and defense issues. Thank you for letting me clean up here. I think my presentation looking at operational issues and challenges will follow perfect from the prior presentations. What I'll be talking about are legal risks and issues resulting from the operation of scrubbers or exhaust gas cleaning systems. This will include challenges owners and operators are facing based on differing regulatory requirements in various jurisdictions, managing issues when they arise, and taking preventive and corrective actions to help avoid port state control, delays, and enforcement actions. In short, we'll talk about the basic requirements, exemptions, and staying in compliance and out of trouble. So this is what we'll talk about. Looking at just some of the basic standards, why we're even talking about scrubbers is because of the sulfur fuel requirements. In ECAs, we're at 0.1%. Worldwide, we're now at 0.5%. And equivalent methods can be used, such as scrubbers, if approved by flag state under Regulation 4, which is what the focus of our discussion is. Also coming out of this is numerous record keeping and reporting and compliance procedures. So per Regulation 3, the Annex 6 regulations do not apply if any emission is necessary for securing the safety of the ship, which is contained throughout MARPOL. But key here is it does not apply to any emission resulting from damage to the ship or its equipment, provided reasonable precautions have been taken and that actions are then promptly taken to minimize emissions. That's the focus of our discussion here. What happens when things don't go as planned? So looking at the compliance exemptions, under Regulation 3, if there's an equipment failure, any exemption would be viewed under Regulation 3, assuming reasonable actions have been taken and troubleshooting has been done promptly. What the challenge is here is the standard for an exemption, or if a non-compliance has occurred, requires interpretation and discretion, which can lead to inconsistent results. Thankfully, IMO has come out with guidance, as have class and some port states, regarding the interpretation of when they will allow exemptions or not take action for non-compliances. IMO's guidance focuses on a malfunction. It basically sets a time period. If a exceedance is greater than an hour, some more significant action must be taken, such as using low sulfur fuel. As mentioned, if it's a transitory period, transitory periods and isolated spikes would not involve a non-compliance necessarily. The factors will be looked at, but generally a transitory non-compliance will be excused. Troubleshooting is key. If there's a significant malfunction, greater than an hour typically, there must be records in the EGCS record book, flag state must be notified, port state must be notified, and corrective actions must be taken. So looking at some examples of other guidance from port and flag state, The Coast Guard has a work instruction that sets forth what they're going to be looking for during a port state control boarding. It specifically references spares, redundancy, and compliant fuel on board. The Coast Guard also expects, if there is a problem, reporting to flag and the RO. ABS similarly notes the importance of redundancy, as does Lloyd's, as does the UK. So the bottom line is planning is key, redundancy is key, and that includes redundancy when the system's being designed and installed and that problems are taken into consideration. So staying out of trouble, I mentioned the guidance, flag and port state emphasizes that these exemptions will only be looked at in the case of sufficient redundancy. How do you determine what's sufficient? Again, that's largely discretionary, but there's guidance and troubleshooting procedures that need to be taken into consideration. The carriage of sufficient spares and compliant fuel is also important. If I'm going to stress anything, it's what's your plan for a breakdown? How are you going to deal when something goes wrong? And not thinking about that at the last moment is going to be critical. Control actions around the world by port states are going to vary. So having that plan, knowing how you're going to deal is imperative to staying out of trouble. One other key challenge is knowing the rules. We've discussed a bit the jurisdictional inconsistencies. Just speaking very briefly about the United States, EPA's vessel general permit governs wash water discharges from scrubbers. It's generally consistent with IMO, but not wholly consistent. The pH standard is different. And the difference is under the US requirements, it's measured at the skin of the ship, not in the mixing zone. Under the VGP also, there are prohibitions on discharging wash water in California and Connecticut. Many local ports, separate and apart from the VGP, have prohibitions in their local port tariffs. And as was mentioned here already, there are prohibitions on discharging in numerous countries and ports around the world. We have seen some enforcement actions. There have been some notices of violation issued by EPA and the Coast Guard under the VGP. There have been some under Annex 6. We've got a recent EPA request for information on compliance regarding operations of EGCS. So I think the government is starting to look at these issues. Criminal enforcement is always on the horizon. We have the Marpole magic pipe cases. I'm always asked, is Annex 6 going to be the next magic pipe? And my response is always, I hope not, but falsification of records under Annex 6 are really no different than under Annex 1. There's already been one criminal prosecution under Annex 6, not for scrubbers, but for using non-compliant fuel and falsifying it. The key takeaway is that the US will continue to aggressively enforce Marpole. They will look for violations, principally focusing on false documentation and cover-ups. Mistakes where there's transparency are almost never enforced criminally. Like under Annex 1, you often hear about whistleblower awards. They were equally available under Annex 6. So it's imperative that all precautions are taken to ensure proper documentation. So to conclude here, staying out of trouble, have clear and concise procedures for dealing with equipment failures. Comply with those procedures. There's nothing worse for a maritime lawyer or defense lawyer than having an action where the procedures weren't complied with. Safety management system, emissions compliance plan, ops manual, and other manuals. Keep accurate and detailed records about what problems are and how they've been fixed. The corrective action is the most critical part of this. Have a strong connection between shipboard and shoreside. Provide guidance. This is a new piece of equipment and it's going to provide challenges. Training. Make sure the crew knows how to operate these ships. If an extra crew member or a dedicated crew member is necessary, please evaluate that before going into operation. Implement lessons learned and best practices. verify the procedures are followed, and the bottom line is be transparent. If there is a required report, make it promptly, and make sure that you have a corrective action and the timing for that corrective action when you're making that report. And with that, I will conclude.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to start a discussion at this point, and I would like to ask each and every one of you, what was the impact of COVID from your perspective, from your point of view, to your operations? And if there's anything, let's say, like a lesson to be learned, what went well, not necessarily bad, but from your perspective, what was the impact of COVID to what we discussed? Starting with Don. Don? Don? Don is not there. Anyway, let's proceed with Nick.
Yeah, for us, COVID had an impact on more than us, on our clients, in that we saw a big reduction in projects in 2020, where before we were getting projects consistently. Once COVID hit and the fuel pricing started to drop, the overall market kind of dried up for the scrubber industry. Luckily, we still had many projects to commission, and we were working on, we completed over 160 scrubbers in 2020 and 2019. So what we ended up doing is go on board and get projects commissioned. The big impact was trying to get there. Our staff had a very difficult time getting visas to go to China or to go to Turkey. And even now it's still dragging in that we have a project that we have to commission in China at the end of April. And getting the visa and the quarantine unknown, was whether it's 2 weeks, it's 4 weeks, and we have to plan for all that. So the big impact on the business itself is a major drop in the business for the last year and the beginning of this year.
Yeah, but we have to assume that it was not necessarily due to COVID, but I mean, COVID...
fuel, yeah.
Yes, but COVID had some sort of impact to the fuel price.
Yes.
Because everything stopped and everything.
Yes.
I mean, with respect to trade. But and again, yeah. Don, can you?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I got mixed up there with the mute. You can hear me now. Yeah, from an industry association, I think the big impacts were the fact that the members, we couldn't meet together, which is important because we meet at least twice a year and get some quite useful discussions and plans going forward. I think probably the bigger impact was the fact that we couldn't meet with some of the interested bodies. IMO, for instance, has pretty much come to a full stop with regard to, changing regulations and bringing out changes for scrubbers, particularly the harmonization work and so on. It hasn't been a big disaster, but it's slow progress. And I think the other one has been the ports. We have not had the chance to go and meet face to face, hold the hand, and have that inquiry as to what's driving port decisions and to try and get them to change their minds.
Yeah. By the way, can you give us your estimate on the numbers of the installed scrubbers so far?
For me, I don't have that documentation, so I'm telling you what you'll have seen elsewhere, and it's about 4,000. Others may have a different number.
We have 4,000, but I mean, I would highly value your, let's say, exact number, not an estimate. But this is what we hear. It's in the range of 4,000. That's okay. That's okay. Let's hear from Chris. Chris, how COVID has affected your operations?
I think for us as an engineering company, it had a profound effect on our operations. I mean, we are involved fairly early in the stage of a project. So and we tend to be finished other than supervision relatively early in the project too. So because COVID hit and the oil price dropped, and the majority of projects in our experience were shelved or paused indefinitely in some cases, we almost fell off a cliff with projects, to be honest. We had a number of large contracts in hand for shipping companies, and within 1 or 2 weeks they all disappeared. So it had a big impact on our business for sure.
Okay, Ollie?
Yeah, our experience is quite identical to what Chris reported, and as we are sort of the main bulk of our work comes from the passenger vessel sector, I would say that the effect was very drastic as the ships are not moving, but we can see some light at the end of the tunnel now, and it's starting to look quite positive now.
Okay. Now let's hear from Jenny. Jenny, from your perspective, I mean, have you seen any sort of developments with what we discussed over 2020 as an impact of COVID, maybe?
Yeah, I think some of the biggest challenges were the crew change and repatriation issues. You know, the crew were not able to move. That affected attitudes. But with respect to the specific issue here, the challenges were with compliance. A lot of compliance activities involved the company or technicians getting on board. That was very challenging in light of COVID because of visa issues and port restrictions and country restrictions. As a result, many compliance obligations couldn't be met, which required exemptions, approvals, dispensations. So lots of challenges in that regard due to COVID and travel restrictions principally. Okay.
Now I would like to ask Don and probably Nicholas, I would like to ask you some of the things around the discussion we had for scrubbers, let's say late 2019, maybe early 2020, before the COVID, actually paused everything. There was an issue about the fuel oil availability. Have you heard of any issues surrounding the topic across the globe? Don?
Yeah, thank you, Apo. No, I haven't heard of fuel availability problems as such. I think most ships have been able to pick up fuel. I do sit on the CMAC Fuels Working Group and also the ISO Standards Group, and also on the Lubricants Group. So I am very well aware that there have been quite some significant problems with using ultra-low sulfur fuel, and particularly VLSFO. Areas like very low viscosities, lower than expected, causing problems with purifiers, operating in an engine room which is somewhat cooler than normal, and finding waxing problems and engines stopping in the middle of the night. So, actually probably less well reported than normal problems. You could speak to several chief engineers and they would have had a problem at least on one fuel.
Yeah, probably. Nick, from your perspective, have you had any issues with regard to the availability of the fuel?
No, but I did not expect that. I remember in 2019 and early 2020, there were discussions about it. And what I will tell my customers is, you will find the fuel. I'm sure you'll find it. The issue is going to be what quality it is. Because at the time, there were discussions of blending. And so you can always blend to achieve the fuel quality, the fuel sulfur level. So it seems like that's the case. What I've seen until now is the fuel has been available. There's been very few, if any, cases where they were not able to get fuel. But then, as Don mentioned, the quality of the fuel has been a problem in some cases.
Yeah. Now, I would like, my next one is about the numbers. Again, both of you will be able to provide feedback. We have these 4,000 installations, more or less, into the market. The price differential collapsed for a number of reasons. Anyway, the price differential will never, in the long run, it cannot stay at that price range. Anyway, that's a guess, but that's an educated guess, I think. But we've seen that the issue of scrubbers is picking up again in the market. This is what we hear. What's your views on that? What's your takes on that? Because we hear that that the owners who invested in scrubbers have taken more or less, especially with the larger ships, they're taking the money back even within a few months. So what do you see in the market, and what do you expect with respect to the figures, what you see? Because I cannot agree more with what Don says. Tomorrow we have a day dedicated to alternative fuels, to future fuel options, but I cannot agree more with what Don said in his opening statement. For 20 years, we're going to use what we call SEMA today, the marine diesel oil. So, Don, your takes. What do you see with the numbers?
Well, I can't really speak as to why there's an interest. Nick, I'm sure, can answer that. But I think what has happened is that there's been confidence in terms of reliability, in terms of performance. There has been some systems that haven't worked well, and there have been some suppliers who've disappeared. But overall, I think there's a growing confidence that this is a technology that works and generally makes life easier. I didn't mention in the availability on the high sulfur fuel oil side, I tended to focus on the IMO 2020 fuels, that there has not been any reports of a shortage of fuel available for high sulfur to run on a scrubber. And I would say that the other thing I learned yesterday in some discussions with some colleagues was that there's almost it's becoming standard to fit scrubbers on some of the new builds. In fact, the numbers I heard were virtually every new build now has a scrubber fitted. In certain
ship sizes, this is what we hear. That's why I'm asking. This is what we hear, and that's interesting because we see that owners. I'm not sure. I mean, let's hear from Nick, but I'm not sure it's only a matter of reliability of the equipment. Nick, what's your take on what we see?
Yeah, the issue. Everything ties into fuel pricing, right, and the differential. What we are seeing is that it is coming back, although the fuel pricing differential hasn't increased that much since December of last year. It has gone up somewhat, but the forecast is that it's going to keep going up. And most customers have people in their staff that looks at fuel pricing and makes projections. And the projections are that it's going to probably go within the next 6 months, maybe 150. And at the 150, you can justify the investment. You mentioned about the companies that already installed the scrubbers. They are saving money, even at the very low price. They are saving money, even if it's $80 or $90 differential. That's a savings that goes into their pocket. It's for the new clients who have to make the new investment. Instead of their typical 2.5 to 3 years payback, which is they assume in their calculations, at the low price right now, which is about $100 per ton, the differential, the investment may drag out to about 4 or 5 years, and that's not a good enough return to make an investment. But some of them are much more proactive. What are we seeing is the companies that already have scrubbers are right now looking at adding scrubbers because they're comfortable with the scrubber. They're seeing that they're saving money, and the projection that in 6 months is going to be higher is good enough for them because it's going to take 6 to 8 months to get a project done anyway. So they'll be ready when the pricing is up.
Correct. I think you nailed it more or less. Yeah. This is what is happening in the market. Let's hear from Chris and Oli. At some point, both of you have to present some sort of feasibility study and you have to present a case to the owners. What's your feedback with respect of how they approach the issue of installing a scrubber for the time being and for the near and the short term? Chris?
I would echo what Nick and Don were saying, in that the majority of the inquiries we are receiving right now are from owners who already have scrubbers fitted elsewhere in their fleet. So perhaps they have already purchased equipment but haven't fitted it yet, so they're looking at different vessels. Many of them have traded vessels during the last year, so their fleet profile maybe looks a little bit different than it did 12, 18 months ago. So yeah, most of the inquiries we're receiving certainly are from owners who have scrubbers fitted already. There's not so much from people who are now looking about to install their first scrubbers. It's more people who have trust the technology, have already tried it, and see the benefits, both financially and operationally.
Okay, and Oli, your thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree with the previous statements. I actually don't know a single ship owner that has installed scrubbers that would think that it was a mistake. The hesitation is only with the ones that haven't installed. Basically, I guess there is some sort of fear about the complexity of the system and so on. And even though my presentation was a bit sort of pessimistic, just bringing up the challenges, I'm definitely not against scrubbers. I believe that it's a really good investment, and actually, especially on new builds. So on new builds, it's a no-brainer. There's the installation cost, let's say in the ship price, is a lot less than if you do it as a retrofit. So definitely that's how it seems. And basically, especially on the passenger ship side, there's two options. There's either HFO and scrubber or LNG. Nobody is installing or building the ship with MGO. And on the other hand, we started off some years ago with the passenger ship installations, but the retrofits are more or less done now, and the current retrofits that we are working on, they are on cargo ships.
Yeah, but I mean, again, in the new buildings, it may be a problem that we see in a great extent with the ballast water treatment systems, where it's very difficult to change the specification provided by a yard, and you have to more or less accept the make-it that they are, let's say, more or less adjusting. And we've seen, I'm giving the example of the ballast water treatment systems, we've seen systems that are not operating at all, problematic systems. Have you seen that happening with the yards and the specification for the new builds?
Well, at least we work a lot with the owners to actually make their inquiry specifications, and then we comment the yard specifications. And actually, two important things that are listed in the makers lists are the scrubbers and the ballast water treatment, because we know that there are systems that are not as good quality as some others. So those are of typical or very important. They are very important to the owners.
Okay. Thank you. Let's go to Ginny. Ginny, you mentioned some cases who have been reported in the past about the violations of Annex 6 of MARPOL with regards to air emission. And this is a draconian rule that the US Coast Guard has, and it has a three-tier way of calculating the final fee, and the fee could be multiple times the savings that you may have if you avoid using the proper fuel. Now, do you expect, you highlighted where we stand with regards to the compliance, but do you expect, especially, I have two, let's say, sub-questions. One question is about the VGP. What do you expect in the next VGP? Because we have some sort of substantial delay of introducing new requirements for the VGP. Should we expect new requirements for the VGP to be, let's say, higher than it is now, tougher than what it is now? My first leg of the question is this, and the other about the compliance. Should we be worried about having let's say, tighter enforcement, let's say, framework over there in the US, I mean, with respect to scrubbers specifically and air emissions more generically? What do you feel?
Thanks. In terms of the VGP, that was replaced by the Vessel Incidental Discharge Act about 2 years ago. And EPA has the obligation to implement the standards, and it had 2 years to implement the standards, which were supposed to be finalized in December. That did not happen. The deadline was missed, and from what we're hearing now with the change in our administration, those standards are months away at best. There's some indication that they may actually be revising them significantly enough that they may need to be reproposed. With respect to scrubbers, it's a very positive development because they've taken the different US standards and basically conformed them with the IMO standards. So if that stays, that's a very good thing. And hopefully the next VGP or the next implementation of VITA, the Vessel Incidental Discharge Act, will be more consistent internationally. With respect to enforcement, I don't think we're going to see that many changes in the United States. The Coast Guard will dedicate port state control resources to environmental compliance. If there's any indication of non-transparency or falsification of records or hiding non-compliances, it will be as aggressive as we've ever seen it with MARPOL Annex 1. So my message is always to owners: identify a problem, figure out how you're going to deal with it, and then report it to the Coast Guard. And virtually across the board, you will get a good result out of that.
Okay, thank you. I'm asking specifically for the compliance, regime, let's say the enforcement regime, because what we've seen is something strange happened in the market. With the implementation of the IMO 2020, there was only, I think, less than 30 fuel oil non-availability reports submitted to the IMO, something extremely small as a figure. But we know that the industry is providing some sort in the range of 200,000 bunkerings per annum. So it's a huge number. Now, out of all these bunkerings, I'm sure, we are all sure, that some of these fuels should be off-spec for some reasons. But we haven't seen, let's say, detentions or compliance measures across the globe, not in the US, because in the US, as you correctly said, they have a specific regime, most probably the most well-enforced regime across the globe. But again, globally, we haven't seen that many detentions. It should be in the range of 3 to 4 detentions or something like that across the globe. So it doesn't make sense. Maybe it's due to COVID, but we have to wait and see. That's why I'm asking. Now, it's time for us to wrap up this panel. I would like to ask a final question. I would like to ask you, and from your perspective again, give us your thoughts on what should we expect in the near future with respect to scrubbers. And what's your wish list of how this should be implemented? Try to wrap up your thoughts and give me your feedback. Don.
Thank you, Apo, and thank you very much for this session. It's been very interesting. I think, my wish list is that we continue to have dialogue with the interested parties. I think the technology is here to stay and will resolve other problems. It was already being used for exhaust gas recirculation to reduce NOx, and as Nick said, will be used to reduce black carbon and particulate matter. I think that the areas of concern, such as reliability, have been well covered by Chris and Ollie in terms of selecting the right vendors, the people who've got the design and they're going to be there for the long term. And obviously the installation and the engineering is absolutely essential. And then you don't get into the need to call Jeannie to help you out. And I think finally, I think in my wish list will be, we will continue to work on the worries around the impacts or non-impacts of discharges into the marine environment, and go on to prove or to find where there are things to be done to ensure that the technology can work in a sustainable way that helps us today and into the future.
Yeah, thank you. I have to comment on what you said, that Jenny will have her hands full at all times for a number of reasons. It is beyond what we discuss in this panel, because people tend to try to be very resourceful and try to deviate and bend the rule. So let's hear from Nick. Nick, your thoughts, your wish list.
I agree with Don in terms of where this is going next. I think fine particulates reduction is going next. So what we have done as a company, we are now developing technologies for some of that, what we expect to be the future of scrubbers. We've now introduced the next level of water treatment, because we think the water is going to be a big issue, continuing to be, because political reasons, not so much because of technical reasons, but politically we have to address it. So we've now stepped up the quality of the water treatment that we offer. We are developing the technology to remove PM 2.5 and below. So that's going to give us black carbon, fine particulates. And we are developing a technology for CO2 reduction at the stack. So those are the issues I think we're going to be faced with within the next 10 years. Could be next year, could be 5 years, but definitely we're going to see those coming up as a requirement. Implementation, I think what IMO does is it's slow enough to allow people to implement things. So it's not so fast that the technology is not going to be there. I think when IMO issues the new rules, companies like ours will be ready for it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Chris, your thoughts, your takes?
Yes, I would agree with Nick and with Don. I think, as the fuel price differential starts to recover, scrubbers will become more appealing again, and for sure the industry will pick up. Will it return to the crazy situation we had in 2019? Probably not. But I think this is probably for everyone's benefit, to be honest. I mean, the yards, the manufacturers, it was crazy times. And we talked earlier about feasibility studies. In our experience in 2019, the feasibility study for an owner was which manufacturer is available right now, and I will place an order with them. That's how crazy things were. So I think the consolidation in the industry, thanks to COVID, will help also. The manufacturers who were not so reliable have faced the consequences of this now, and hopefully this consolidation, a bit more time on our side, less of a rush, will enable us all to do things better, and for the owners ultimately to have a more reliable product at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Ollie?
Yeah, I have to say that my opinion is that the technology is mature. We have solutions for all vessel types and all operating areas. The thing is that we just need to look at the environmental aspects objectively. And I mean that, we have to base our decisions on science and not on feelings. And as an engineer, that's easy, but it's not easy for everybody. And of course, the challenges that I listed in my presentation, they can all be solved by proper engineering. So I just recommend everybody to choose their engineers properly.
Correct. And one of the things we discussed on the ballast panel, and it's one of the key challenges. I mean, in the ballast water treatment systems, there are two things repeated in what you said over the last 10 years. You have to start early because you have to allow it takes time. It's what Nick said earlier on. It takes more than 6 months to have let's say a scrubber installed. The same applies more or less to ballast, and we expect a bottleneck, and the bottleneck happened especially with the classification societies. And we have to also bear in mind to what Chris said, that owners have to also face at the same time they have to comply with ballast, and that's for the benefit of the whole industry, that this thing with the scrubbers will not be on the same crazy let's say buzz that was happening late 2019 and maybe early 2020. So that's an issue again for all of us. And Ginny, your thoughts?
Sure. Just to conclude here, my wish is that companies focus on compliance, which is critical with any fairly new technology, which includes maintenance of the equipment, training in accordance with the manuals, and then verifying from shoreside that those procedures are being followed. It's a reality that mistakes are going to happen. They've happened in the past, they're going to happen in the present and future. And what's most critical, especially when dealing with the United States, is how you deal with those mistakes. Being transparent, figuring out the problem, reporting, and taking corrective actions. Yeah, cannot agree more. I would like to thank you all. Thank you for taking the time to join this panel. Thank you for bringing your thoughts and ideas to this informative discussion. I would like to thank all our audience, and we trust that we will see you forward in one of our future events. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.